They were licensed to sin, taxed to survive, punished without mercy, yet never protected. In the heart of medieval Europe, prostitution wasn't merely tolerated, it was regulated, profited from, and coldly systematized. These women were shamed and essential, vilified yet needed. Their bodies funded cathedrals, while their names were whispered only in scandal. This is the unvarnished reality of women who sold what the world refused to value: themselves. Not every prostitute started in despair, but many ended there. Some slipped into the trade one small decision at a time. Others were shoved by life's brutal indifference. A few were orphaned before they could speak their full names. Others were widows, discarded by husbands or wars they didn't start. Some girls were sold off by desperate fathers drowning in debt, or handed over by stepmothers eager to feed one less mouth. And others, they were fleeing something. Fleeing fists, silence, hunger, or ghosts of a past too raw to name. In a society where boys trained as blacksmiths or scribes, girls without dowries were offered no tools, no trades, only the currency of their own skin. They came young, many too young to bleed. The eldest barely stood, scrubbing sheets that would soon be stained again. She may have once worn white. She may have once held her child close. She may have once believed in love. But now she worked where no one asked names, where touch wasn't gentle, where each coin fell like a verdict into a life she no longer owned. Prostitution wasn't a secret. It was a system, logged, governed, and taxed like grain or salt. In cities like Florence, Paris, and Nuremberg, brothels operated on official licenses. Each woman was named, each name documented. They paid rent, followed dress codes. No velvet, no pearls, no shoes that looked too fine. Local ordinances dictated their meals, their linens, their bathing schedules down to the week. A 1470 law in Nuremberg mandated that every woman receive 2 meals a day, each with 2 courses, and 1 bath a week, all at the brothel keeper's expense. But this wasn't care, it was control. Bureaucracy stitched into skin, compassion measured in rations. Stepping outside designated zones? Fined. Turning down a client? Punished. On the wrong street at the wrong hour? Penalized. A prostitute wasn't free. She was counted, categorized, and easily replaced. Her body was a contract, and the city held the ink. Forget the stories told by soft paintings. No silk robes, no candlelit rooms, no laughter behind velvet curtains. Medieval brothels weren't places of pleasure. They were cages. Rooms were damp. Walls wept mildew. Mattresses were straw sacks soaked with secrets. Blankets barely existed, let alone warmed. There were no musicians. Only echoing footsteps, muffled cries behind closed doors, and the relentless chime of coins being tallied. Always counted, always earned. They lived by rules, under rotation, with hours set by someone else. Some brothels appointed older women as wardens. Others relied on male guards doubling as watchers and punishers. In cities like Cologne or Avignon, entire red light districts were cordoned off, marked boldly on civic maps. Sexual service segregated from the so-called respectable. Clients crept in under darkness. Or worse, during church bells. They left behind no names, no tenderness, only coin and disease. Mornings meant cleaning, blood from sheets, sweat from stones, shame from faces. Then came the waiting for the next knock, the next deal, the next hour where life was leased again. Protection? None. Doctors? Rare. Sympathy? non-existent. They prayed for safety, but even heaven looked away. Syphilis hadn't yet marched through Europe, but its vile siblings already roamed freely. Gonorrhea, lice, scabies, blisters, bleeding, burning. No antibiotics, no anesthetics. Pain was mistaken for divine punishment. The sick weren't treated, they were erased. Their names crossed from ledgers like spoiled produce. Some tried to heal themselves. Wormwood soaked in wine. Vinegar dripped onto open wounds. Mercury rubbed into raw skin, worsening what it tried to cure. Others bled themselves or whispered charms into bowls of ash and urine. Most simply endured, worked through fevers, smiled with rotting gums, gave until their bones gave way. And when they died, they weren't mourned as women. They were disposed of like waste. No names carved, no prayers said, just silence and cold earth. Because in their world, death wasn't a tragedy. It was just bad business. Some bled visibly, others bled in silence. Pregnancy was a constant gamble, a loaded die roll nightly. A yes often meant, I can't afford no. No father claimed. No coin followed. Just a growing belly in a world that punished the result of men's desires. Some women raised their children within those walls. Babies rocked to sleep beside the creaking of beds. Toddlers learned to walk near sweat-stained sheets. Others handed them to orphanages or monasteries, surrendering motherhood to stone and prayer. But some took darker turns. Pennyroyal tea sipped in fear. Tansy leaves chewed into bitter pulp. Rusty tools hidden beneath straw. Starvation as abortion. If caught, they were whipped or branded, not for ending a pregnancy, but for daring to choose, daring to own their wombs. There are no graves for those lost children, no records for the women who tried to undo what the world forced upon them. Only herbs under floorboards and memories locked in silence. The church did not bless them, but it didn't erase them neither. According to theology, they were the necessary sin, flesh traded for order, lust taxed and sealed. St. Augustine called them sewers, filthy but essential, better contained than unleashed, so long as brothels paid their dues and women confessed between clients. The church looked elsewhere. In some towns, the brothel and the chapel stood side by side, not by accident, but by divine hypocrisy. Monasteries leased lands to brothel keepers. Priests walked past open doors. Money didn't just trickle downward. It circulated like a guilty secret. Preachers who thundered from pulpits against the sins of the flesh often used the very coins those women earned to buy redemption. Some friars would slip into brothels under the holy veil of saving souls, whispering prayers after pleasure, offering benediction post-bed. The irony wasn't hidden. It was carved into the very stones of cathedrals, hummed in sacred chants. She was a sinner, but she bankrolled the altar. She was condemned, but her dues paved the priest's path. And when she asked for mercy too often, the church turned deaf, not because she had sinned beyond forgiveness, but because her sin had become ordinary. These women weren't free, not by any stretch. Their lives were dictated, not lived, ruled by ordinances, not choices. They couldn't wear what they wished. Velvet was outlawed. Pearls were forbidden. Fur-trimmed sleeves, silk shoes, gold-stitched hems, all banned, lest someone mistake them for respectable ladies. Their garments weren't fashion. They were regulation. Striped cloth, dull earth tones, or stitched insignias were mandatory, not for aesthetics, but so the public could recognize them instantly. Their freedom of movement was just as constrained. Curfews boxed them in like shadows chained to sundials. Every woman had to carry documentation, proof she was registered. No papers? Expect the whip. If she insulted a client, even one who struck her, she faced fines. Refuse a man? Dismissed. Operate outside the brothel walls? The punishment would be swift, public, and humiliating. Aging wasn't technically illegal, but it may as well have been. A limp, a wrinkle, a fading smile, enough to end a livelihood. No severance, no roof, just a new, younger girl filling the bed she was kicked out of. The rules weren't crafted to maintain order. They were forged to enforce dominance. A daily reminder that her body wasn't hers. It belonged to the town, to the market, to the lawmakers who profited while she bled. Punishment was never a quiet matter. It was a pageant of shame, a flesh-bound morality tale. Caught outside her zone or working without permission, she wasn't fined in private. No, she was dragged through markets, over bridges, down cathedral stairs, places where clients once murmured her name with desire. Now they spat it in derision. Her clothes stripped, sometimes entirely. Her hair hacked off before a jeering crowd. A wooden placard hung around her neck. Children stared. Women turned away. Men, often the very ones who just shared her bed, laughed. In more brutal towns, she might be locked in a wooden cage, hoisted for all to see, left to shiver through rain and snow, barefoot, body trembling not just from cold, but from humiliation so deep it outlived the bruises. Some were branded, hot iron pressed to cheek. Others forced to carry buckets filled with a week's worth of clients' urine, one basin for each illicit encounter. These weren't crimes being punished. These were the wages of survival, penalties crafted not merely to harm, but to humiliate. They were warnings, etched in flesh, broadcast to every girl peering through her window, wondering what disobedience might cost. The lesson? You could be sold, but never dare act like you owned yourself. Some escaped, but always at a cost. A few managed to marry, though usually not for love. Their husbands were often debtors, ex-soldiers, tavern keepers, men exiled by society themselves. These weren't love stories. They were alliances. Two broken people clutching each other for shelter. Others rose within the system, becoming madams. They survived by enforcing the same brutal rules that once punished them. When the whip is the only thing that ever touched you, sometimes the only way to stop bleeding is to hold it in your own hand. And then there were the ghosts, those who fled to convents, vanished into other towns, or simply disappeared. Some claimed they found God. Some claimed they found peace. Many were never heard from again, lost to forests, rivers, or ledger margins that never bothered recording the final chapter. They left no tombstones, no crests, no mourning masses, just anonymous bones buried beneath city stones, uncovered centuries later by archaeologists and quietly reburied, still unnamed, still unacknowledged. Their stories weren't preserved because society didn't deem them worthy of history. What they did was labeled shame, not memory. They were erased from books, not written into them. What does it mean when the only thing a woman owns is her own body? And even that is leased by the hour. In medieval Europe, she wasn't a villain, nor was she a heroine. She was a tool, taxed, punished, exploited, and cast aside the moment she stopped generating profit. She gave men exactly what they demanded, and was condemned for it. She filled city coffers, then was banished from its stories. Her survival depended on submitting to a world that saw her not as a person, but as a commodity. She didn't choose freedom. She chose not to starve. And that reality is haunting. She was essential to the machinery of medieval cities, yet never embraced by the society she sustained. Regulated like a commodity, condemned like a sinner. Her labor was taxed, her body policed, and when her life ended, there were no prayers whispered in her name, no candles lit by family, no legal pause to mark her passing. But history should pause, because no civilization can claim greatness if it forgets the women who cleaned its filth, filled its coffers, and held its broken pieces together without ever being welcomed at the table. We don't remember them as saints. We don't cast them as villains. We recognize them as they truly were. Human beings. Not holy, not wicked, just survivors. And in a world rigged to crush them, survival itself was a quiet act of rebellion. So ask yourself, how many of these stories have been buried? How many voices were never allowed to speak? If you believe they deserve to be remembered, that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, deserves to be told, then you're in the right place. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Vassal Truths, because here, we honor the forgotten. We shine light into the shadows and the past. It's never as distant or as silent as you think.